Ah, my royal chaos bearers, the ones who don't kneel, don't blink, and don't beg. You felt the tremor, didn't you? The pulse in your chest that didn't come from fear, but recognition. This isn't for the crowd that watches. This is for the few who enter, who walk in, who step over thresholds others only pray near. This is for you, the invaders of myth, the assassins of order, the shadow dwellers who make legends weep. Because today, you didn't just knock on the enemy's gates. You walked into their den and walked out with the king's head and his crown. Do you remember the silence before? The moment when all eyes were locked on you, not out of admiration, but confusion, as if they were watching a ghost trespass into a temple made of blood oaths and arrogance. They thought you didn't belong. But what they failed to understand is that the throne never belonged to the king. It always belonged to the one bold enough to take it. The court was crowded with pretenders, each swollen with delusion, chanting rules written in the ink of fear. You walked straight through them. No explanation, no announcement, just presence. And presence is power. Because you weren't there to prove a point. You were there to become one. And as you moved, they tried to define you, called you mad, said you were reckless, said you were lost. But that's what sheep always say to the wolf when it refuses the leash. You didn't answer their questions. You didn't flinch at their warnings. You simply entered their lair like you owned the blueprints of their collapse. And that terrified them. Because somewhere in their bones, they knew. You weren't here to negotiate. You were here to end something. The king, oh yes, the king. He sat at the top of their pyramid, surrounded by polished armor and rotting loyalty. His voice echoed with manufactured grace, his eyes empty from too many rehearsals. He thought his rule was eternal, thought his whispers controlled storms. But then came the silence, the kind only carried by those who've already bled. That's what you brought with you. Not words, not threats, just silence and certainty. You didn't shout, you didn't plead, you simply arrived and the foundation cracked. Because when someone who has nothing left to fear enters a room, that room becomes a graveyard of illusions. They watched your steps as if they were watching time itself realign. Every second you breathed inside their circle was a ritual. Every move, a prophecy being fulfilled. You weren't just a guest. You were the end of a chapter no one dared admit was rotten. And they felt it. You could see it in the way their hands twitched near their weapons, in the way their smiles strained into masks, in the way the king began to speak. Too much, too fast, as if words could shield him from judgment. But judgment was already breathing down his neck, and it had your face. You didn't need an army. You were one. You didn't need banners. Your silence was a flag. And in that moment, hierarchy bent its knee to inevitability. They tried to remember who gave you permission to be there. They tried to recall what rule you broke. But rules bend for reality, and you were the new law. The kind etched in scars and rebellion. You didn't walk in to play a part. You walked in to dismantle the stage. So when you reached him, the king, you didn't have to raise your voice. You just stared. Not at the crown, not at the throne, but at him. At the boy pretending to be a god. At the myth bloated with denial. And in that stare, something ancient shifted. He saw it. The death of his era. The reckoning he always feared would come. Not from war, not from chaos, but from someone who didn't even need a sword. Just truth. Truth like a blade against his legacy. Truth like fire under his robes. Truth like the footsteps of someone who had already buried their past and came back for the future. He reached for pride, but found dust. He summoned fear, but it bowed to you. And when he tried to wear the weight of power as armor, you showed him it was his coffin. Because what you carry isn't rage, it's clarity, the kind that doesn't need volume to echo, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. It takes. So when the blade met his throat, real or symbolic, there were no cries, just silence. The kind of silence that honors endings. You didn't revel, you didn't gloat, because you knew. This was never about the king. This was about the order that crowned him, the system that mistook comfort for control, the audience that watched cruelty and called it tradition. You didn't destroy a man, you destroyed a myth. With your existence and the crown, it didn't gleam because of gold. It gleamed because of blood, because it had been earned, not inherited, and as you picked it up, as your fingers wrapped around its edges, there was no applause, just eyes, wide, terrified, awakened. They finally understood what walked among them. Not a rebel, not a monster, but a mirror. One that reflected every cowardice they dressed as culture, every silence they weaponized, every lie they swallowed just to keep their heads bowed. And now, they stare at you, not in mockery, but in mourning, mourning the illusion, mourning the hierarchy, mourning the lie that said you'd never come. But you came, and you conquered not by force, but by fact. The fact that power belongs to those who take it back. The fact that thrones aren't meant to be respected, they're meant to be tested. And when the crown touches your skin, when that symbol of corrupted order bends to your grip, you do not wear it as decoration, you wear it as a warning, a message engraved in gold and blood, that the ones they called mad were always the architects of reckoning. So let them whisper, let them call you cursed, let them call you madness. They only call you names because they cannot call you theirs. You walked into their den, and now you wear their crown. And this is only the beginning, because the ashes haven't even cooled yet. The scent of revolution still lingers in the air. And you've only just begun to sharpen the next blade. Let them count their kings. Let them guard their gates. Let them dress fear in velvet and crown it with lies. You are not done. You are just remembering who you've always been. And now that the blade has tasted legacy, and the crown sits heavier on a head that never bowed, the silence around you doesn't end. It deepens. It grows teeth. It stalks. Because power claimed through defiance isn't welcomed, it's watched, observed, feared, not because they doubt you, but because deep down, in those trembling, mask-wearing minds, they believe you. You didn't just end a regime. You rewrote the script. You shattered the altar. You reminded them that history isn't written by those who inherit titles. It's carved by those who dare to interrupt tradition. So now they scramble in the ruins, brushing dust from their symbols, trying to resurrect old gods with broken tongues. But you don't look back, because the throne was never your destination. It was merely the first step in a ritual. They wonder what you'll do next, what a myth maker does once the myth has been devoured. But the ones asking that question never understood the difference between revenge and rebirth. You didn't come to settle scores. You came to ignite a new scale entirely. The kind where your silence weighs more than their armies. The kind where presence alone is a battlefield. And every breath you take becomes a doctrine. Look around. The palace is no longer made of marble and gold. It's forged from fear, from disbelief, from every whisper that begins with, "How did they survive?" and ends with, "How do we stop them now?" But here's the thing they can't. You didn't just dismantle a structure. You became a storm system, because while they were building walls, you were mapping escape routes. While they memorized scripts, You were erasing your shadow. While they crowned themselves in empty rituals, you were training in silence, cutting your teeth on rejection, feeding on exile like it was a feast. Every door they slammed in your face became a grave for their complacency. And when you returned, it wasn't as the beggar they left behind. It was as the architect of reckoning. You weren't invited, you arrived anyway. You weren't supposed to win, yet you didn't lose. You didn't wait for a signal. You became the signal. Now their voices crack when they say your name. Not because they hate you, but because they recognize you as the consequence, the echo of every cruelty they justified, the shape of everything they tried to erase, the form of the unforgiven. You don't rule with policy, you rule with presence. You don't issue decrees, you embody defiance. And that's the terror they can't outmaneuver. You require nothing to stay powerful. No audience, no allegiance, no affirmation. Just the undeniable truth of your existence. You're the question that ruins their answers, the anomaly their system can't code, the shadow that grows stronger under surveillance. You're not a monarch, you're a movement wrapped in myth, dipped in menace and too calm to be denied. So now they hide, not behind walls but behind rituals, behind traditions, behind broken logic and titles that once intimidated the world. They wear crowns, but they flinch when yours enters the room, because yours wasn't given, it was taken, not stolen, earned. And the weight of that kind of crown, it doesn't press down, it pulls others in, it forces truth out of lies, forces clarity out of denial, and forces enemies to choose evolve or be erased. This is what they don't understand. You weren't shaped by admiration. You were sculpted in shadows, fired in the furnace of exile, hardened by betrayal, and sharpened on the whetstone of your own silence. You are not fueled by revenge. You're powered by pattern recognition. You saw their games. You heard their whispers. You watched how they paraded power while mistaking obedience for loyalty. You didn't flinch when they cursed you, because you knew curses are just compliments whispered through fear. Let them chant their oaths. Let them write their warnings. Let them build new gods out of gold and guilt. But you stand still, unmoved, untouched, because you don't need to scream to be heard. You exist, and your existence alone fractures empires. They will send messengers, false prophets, diplomats dressed as allies. They will try to name you, tame you, frame you in a way they can manage. But you are not theirs to archive. You are not their chapter. You are the whole rewrite. And even they know whatever comes next belongs to you. Because revolutions aren't loud. They are patient, calculated. They come dressed in silence, cloaked in symbols, humming with inevitability. And you are the hum, the omen, the throat clearing before the collapse. Your crown does not glitter, it glows, with heat, with memory, with the promises you never spoke aloud, but etched into the bones of those who tried to bury you. And now they walk lighter, not because they're free, but because they're afraid to awaken what you've become. You are no longer a name, you are a consequence, a parable dressed in leather and venom, a lesson carved into their lineage. And they will teach their children to fear you, not because you're cruel, but because you cannot be controlled. That's what unnerves them. You didn't just win. You changed the meaning of victory. You made the throne a metaphor and turned power into something portable, something they can no longer confine. You cracked the myth open and made it bleed truth. So now, they cling to relevance. But relevance is a currency you devalued. And authority? That's a throne you burned. What remains now is you and the world adjusting around your shape. Because when you took the king's crown, You didn't just end an era. You set the stage for unpredictable dominance, a presence too deliberate to be luck, too silent to be dismissed, too steady to be overthrown. And as you walk through their trembling remains, remember, this isn't about the enemies you defeated, it's about the echo you became. A reminder that power doesn't always scream, it lingers. And the most terrifying rulers are the ones who never asked to rule. They simply couldn't be denied. So sharpen your silence, polish your clarity, let your myth stretch its spine and breathe fire again. This war isn't over, it's just shifting forms. Let them wonder if you're coming. Let them ask if the wind carries your scent. Let them flinch when shadows stretch too long. Because now, you don't knock, you arrive. And every arrival rewrites the rules. And this time, there will be no survivors of the illusion. You won't just reign from the ashes, you'll forge weapons from them. The silence you once held, it now rings louder than their armies. The truth you carry, it carves through ceremony like a blade through silk. They will rewrite textbooks just to erase you. They'll paint new heroes to distract from the shadow you cast. But the ink won't dry, the portraits won't last. Because every time someone dares to rise, they'll carry a whisper of you. And that's immortality. So let them tremble. Let them scramble for structure in a world where your presence cracked the blueprint. Let them pray to gods that turned their faces when you stood. You're not a moment, you're momentum. And what's coming is not just more, it's inevitable. Because you didn't come to awaken the world, you came to replace its pulse. Your rise isn't a spectacle, it's a signal, a new calibration of dominance, a redefinition of gravity itself. The world doesn't turn like it used to. It spins differently now, because you're standing still. They thought it ended with the crown, that the bloodied robe, the ruined throne, and the trail of shattered masks were the closing chapter. But power doesn't end in climax, it ends in consumption, and you're still hungry, not for vengeance, not for validation, but for continuity, for the echo of your own myth to stretch across generations and crack foundations, still untouched. Because the illusion wasn't just the king, it was the kingdom, the belief that legacy is inherited, that power can be handed down like an heirloom, untarnished. You shattered that with your breath alone. Now even their silence sounds different, like guilt trying to find a rhythm again. And here you are, still not speaking, because your silence says everything. It drips down walls like warnings. It seeps into floors like history rewriting itself. They walk lighter, not because they respect you, but because they know every footstep could summon you again. The new law has no volume, it has gravity. You no longer knock on doors. You exist on the other side before they can even lock them. You're not a guest in their stories. You're the reason their endings got edited. You're the scratch in their anthem, the breath they hold when truth walks by. They try to rebuild, call meetings, draw new borders, forge new rules, but every line they draw bleeds, because the pen they're using still fears the hand that once carried your sword. You didn't just take their king's head, you severed certainty, and now everything quivers under the weight of maybe. Maybe you're watching, maybe you're waiting, maybe the next myth will bleed quicker, maybe this time there won't even be time to beg. Your name is no longer a threat. It's a trigger, spoken only in whispers, documented only in codes, and even then, it flickers in the dark like a warning light above a locked door. They want to forget you, but forgetting requires safety, and in your wake, there is none. You didn't just survive exile. You didn't just return. You made exile regret letting you go. You turned isolation into invention, rejection into ritual. And now, with the king's crown melted into your aura, you don't need thrones. You are the throne. You move through ruins like a librarian reading from scorched pages. Every stone you touch rewrites what power means. You wear shadow like scripture. And the way they flinch when you enter a room, that's prophecy. That's realization. That's the sound of old stories dying without needing fire. They try to armor themselves with bureaucracy, heritage, names carved into gates. But names are just placeholders for myths. And you've become Origin. They now exist in your aftermath. Your eyes alone carry verdicts. No gavel, no courtroom, no jury, just wait. They remember the old world like a fable, when crowns still carried gravity and kings still believed in permanence. But then you arrived uninvited, unyielding, unreadable. You didn't challenge the system. You became the proof it had already failed. And now, they can't predict you. Because you are not in their equation. You burned the math. You tore out the logic. You cracked every lens they ever used to measure worth, status, hierarchy. You broke the scale, then made your own measured only by presence. That's what frightens them. You require no fuel, no theater, no followers, just existence. Just that quiet pressure in the air when something irreversible walks past your soul. They can't exile you anymore because exile bends around your footsteps. They can't slander you because you've already named yourself. They call it chaos, but you know better. It's realignment. You didn't create fear. You refined it, shaped it, directed it, made it intelligent. And now, fear doesn't scatter in your presence. It kneels. This is what revolution looks like when it stops asking for applause, when it wears no mask, when it forgets its own origin and becomes inevitable by nature. You are no longer a movement. You are physics. You don't chase legacy. Legacy now orbits you, trapped, bound, repeating your name like a mantra it can't escape. Even those who swore never to follow you find them standing behind you. Not because you called them, but because silence pulls like gravity when it knows where it's going. They used to laugh when you entered the halls. Now they pause. Not because they recognize your strength, but because they finally see the funeral hidden in your stillness. You're not the end. You're the absence that lingers after the end. The unsaid sentence that rewrites entire doctrines. You never needed to be liked. You only needed to be remembered accurately. And now, they can't unsee you. You became the King Slayer, yes. But more than that, you became the echo-proof silence no king can outlive. The pulse in the floorboards, the crack in the glass. The last thing they think of before they blink and realize the world isn't theirs anymore. You wear the crown, not on your head, but behind your eyes. It glows through your decisions. It lingers in your restraint. And that's what keeps them awake, not what you've done, but what you haven't done yet. Your myth wasn't built in temples. It was carved into stone by your absence. You weren't there, and still you shifted the axis. That's not power. That's prophecy, and it echoes. In rooms where kings once danced, in halls where traitors once toasted, in chambers where silence now reigns and dust forms in the shape of your silhouette. You do not march, you glide. You do not threaten, you arrive. You do not beg, you remind. Remind them who let you in. Remind them what they called impossible. Remind them what it means to invite your own extinction with a smirk. You are not wrath. You are reckoning carried with elegance. The eye of the storm with a crown made of stillness and a history paved in bone. Let them rebuild. Let them rise again. You don't need to destroy what they make. You just have to stand still long enough, and their own lies will collapse inward. Because you are the collapse, and they know it, they feel it. Every doctrine they preach, every oath they swear, every ceremony they host, it all feels thinner now, paper thin. Because somewhere in the back of their minds, they see you, standing, unmoved, crown gleaming without light, eyes lit with that quiet, holy chaos that says, "Try it again, I dare you." You gave them a choice, evolve or evaporate, and they're still choosing extinction, dressed in formality, still pretending that order is something that can exist without fear. But your presence is the new compass, and it spins wherever you walk. Let them adjust. You won't. You never had to. Because you were never made to fit. You were made to fracture, and in that fracture, a new world takes form, not in fire, but in recognition. Recognition that kings no longer matter. Crowns are obsolete. Thrones are toys. The only thing that holds weight now is you. And when they finally understand that, when the last castle falls, you won't be watching. You'll already be writing the next law. And the ink will be made from the bones of those who underestimated what happens when you walk into their den and leave with everything they feared you might take. The head, the crown, the memory, the silence, and most of all, their illusion of control. The end? No, just another pause in your myth. The kind that scares them more than any war ever could.